What you're seeing in the news, tensions between United States and Iran, missiles, warships, is only the surface of the problem. Those images are easy to focus on, but they are not what's quietly shaping the global system. The deeper issue lies in how the world actually operates through choke points, places where flows of energy, materials, and capital are forced to pass through. When a choke point is controlled, the system doesn't need to be destroyed to be affected. It can be influenced simply by controlling that flow. A clear example is the Strait of Hormuz, where nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through. It doesn't need to be fully blocked to create a crisis. Even the risk of disruption is enough to move global energy prices. What matters is that these choke points don't just exist on maps. They exist deep inside supply chains, especially in industries considered the future, like energy and technology. If you look at critical minerals for batteries and electric vehicles, the system appears globally distributed at first. Cobalt is heavily mined in Democratic Republic of the Congo, lithium in Australia, and nickel in Indonesia. On the surface, it looks diversified, but the real constraint appears in the next step. These raw materials cannot be used as they are. They must be processed and refined before entering manufacturing. And unlike mining, this stage is highly concentrated. Today, most of the world's refining capacity for these critical minerals is located in China, which dominates the processing of lithium, cobalt, graphite, and rare earth elements. This means that even though resources are extracted globally, the system still depends on a few specific nodes. When disruptions happen, it's not because the world runs out of resources, but because the flow through these intermediate points is affected. In other words, the system isn't truly decentralized. It only appears that way on the surface. Developments in 2025 to 2026 make this even clearer. China has expanded export controls on key materials such as rare earths, gallium, germanium, and graphite, while tightening restrictions on metals like tungsten and antimony. This is not about completely shutting off supply, but about controlling how and when materials flow, and who gets access to them. On the other side, United States, together with more than 50 countries, has been working to build alternative supply chains to reduce dependence. But building new refining capacity is capital-intensive, technically complex, and takes years. In the short term, the system remains highly dependent on existing structures. Another important dynamic is price control through supply. Lithium prices have dropped sharply even as long-term demand is expected to rise. Increased output from dominant players has flooded the market, making projects in countries like United States, Canada, and Australia less viable or delayed. This shows that control is not only about restricting supply, but also about influencing prices and shaping which competitors can survive. When you step back, this is not simply a story about resources or shortages. It is a story about structure. Power does not necessarily lie where resources are extracted, but where the most critical stages of the value chain are concentrated, places that are difficult to bypass or replace. The consequences don't stop at governments or corporations. They flow down to individuals. When supply chains tighten or shift, production costs rise, prices increase, and the pressure is ultimately absorbed by workers and consumers. This also slows down the energy transition, making new technologies more expensive and less accessible. Looking ahead, the real question is not whether the world has enough resources, but whether the system can become more diversified at its most critical points. If choke points are simply relocated rather than reduced, the same vulnerabilities will continue to reappear. Because in reality, choke points don't disappear. They move. In the past, it was oil and shipping routes. Today, it's mineral refining. Tomorrow, it may be something else entirely. So instead of asking where resources are, the better question might be, where must everything pass through? And who controls it?